yesterday, and today is going to be great. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm sure you're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for another exciting day of this 3-day colloquium. Yesterday's theme was transformative scholarship of engagement, and Prof. Chetty started the proceedings by really speaking truth to power, as it was said in the chat. He provided statistics that were stark and painted how bleak the reality was. He outlined the importance of authentic, ethical agency, which should be the basis of all our partnerships with all our various communities. He also indicated that academia must not be perceived to be complicit in furthering these social problems, and he called these problems the traps. These were systemic societal problems which to the center as a strategic priority of the academic enterprise. It was emphasized time and time again yesterday afternoon that research publications were not the only outcome of scholarship of engagement, but the social impact of these engagements have to be prioritized as well. Professor Levac spoke about the role of governance structures and the legislative frameworks to foster SOE into the fiber of the institutional culture. And Prof. Daniels reiterated the role of higher education as knowledge creators and their critical role in the solution for societal challenges via the SOE. And that involved working with communities and not for communities and not at communities without their input and without their feedback. The deans outlined their SOE projects and the concepts of meaningful engagement meaningfully, and the listening university speaks directly to transformation that is required of our institutional cultures. The deans also provided examples of the various ways in which social impact could be enhanced. These included collaborative practice, thematic approaches, material and resource development interventions in various modes and in various fields. Also, the inclusion of experiential learning for staff and students in projects and developmental interventions across sectors. I think yesterday's main take home for us was to remain vigilant of the importance and the ethics of SOE. And the outcome is not only the focus of being the authors of other people's stories, but the social impact of these engagements with the communities that we involved with. So we look forward to today's proceedings, which focus on the theme, local impact with international relevance. And with that, I'd like to introduce Prof. Levac. And Prof. Levac, I'll hand you over to introduce our keynote speaker for today. I thank you.
Good afternoon. Professor Priscilla Daniels will do the honor on my behalf. So go right ahead.
Thanks, Prof.
Welcome, Prof. Jones.
Okay, so it's indeed my pleasure to introduce Prof. Robert Jones. He's the Chancellor of the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. He's also served as the President of the University of Albany. And he's an experienced scientist and research university leader. I think the nice thing about that I want to highlight is also that he got his PhD at the University of Missouri. And you know, we are tight with the University of Missouri because of our long partnership. So that's really great. I would like to highlight some of his public engagement work, because I think that is where he's going to give us some good pointers and share some of his ideas. At the University of Minnesota, he created the first urban research outreach stroke community center, which was named in his honor in 2015. From 1984 to 1994, he worked as a consultant in the arts to Archbishop Tutu South African education program, which educated more than 3,000 South Africans in American universities. And I think that means he has a true understanding of our context, because he's traveled wide and he's been at all the institutions at UWC. in South Africa. At Illinois, he's established the Illinois Commitment, a program that guarantees 4 years of free tuition and fees to state residents with family incomes less than $67,100 a year. He serves on the board of directors for APLU, Campus Compact, Farm Foundation, the National 4-H Council, and the Donald Danford Plant Science Center. He's a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and a fellow of the American Society of Agronomy and Crop Sciences Society. He's an accomplished vocalist and was a member of the Grammy Award winning Sounds of Blackness choral ensemble for 30 years. And Prof. Levac was saying she's so happy that there's another vocalist, because as we know, Prof is our person for music. And so welcome, Professor Jones. We are very excited to hear what you have to share with us.
Well, first of all, even after 24 months of COVID, I always need to make sure that I'm unmuted. So I hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah, thank you.
We can, Prof.
Okay, well, good afternoon. And let me start by, first of all, thanking Professor Daniels for the invitation to be part of this colloquium today. And Prof. Levac, I certainly look forward to meeting you in person. And who knows, maybe we might do a duet and cut an album or soundtrack together. That would be great fun. Well, let me start by saying, as was indicated, the University of Western Cape is a place that holds great significance to me, both professionally and personally. As was indicated, I had the great pleasure and privilege of spending quite a bit of time, not only at UWC, but in Cape Town and actually across a significant portion of South Africa and Namibia. As early in my career, I had the great honor of working with Archbishop Desmond Tutu as a part of the South African Education Program, which I think you all may recall, was a program that had a very clear goal and objective, and that was how to prepare South Africa post-apartheid by educating more Black South African students in American universities. And I think it was a very lofty goal and one that I take great pride in participating in. And it was at UWC where I first met someone I think that most of you remember or know of, and that is A.B. Daniels, who was a university registrar at the time, I think, and a member of the SAEP National Council. And A.B. started out as a respected professional colleague and quickly became a cherished friend. He taught me the finer things of South African cuisine as well as South African wines. And it was at that same time that I had a great pleasure of meeting his family, including his daughter, Priscilla, who would go on to be, I think, one of the finest examples of the success story and the impact that the SAP program had in reaching the goals that Archbishop Tutu has set. And I have been able to watch her education and professional career unfold with great pride and the enormous impact of her work, not only when she was a newly minted researcher and faculty member at UWC, but most recently as the architect of UWC's very impressive and comprehensive community engagement model. So if you want to look at an example, I believe anywhere in the world of a university that I believe is doing it right, and I say this not because I know the place and I know many of the past leaders of the university and a few of the current faculty and staff, you don't have to look any further than the University of Western Cape, and I can tell you I take great pride in that. So to Professor Levac and Professor Daniel, congratulations on the foundation that you created here. And thank you for inviting me again to be part of this colloquium. And it is really good to be back at the University of Western Cape because it does hold such a special place in my heart. And I'm so happy to be here, even if it's only virtual. And more broadly, thank you to the University of Western Cape for organizing this event and for putting today's focus on how universities can and must prioritize community engagement in order to truly have the kind of global impact on our society and the kind of global impact that society will need for the 21st century and beyond. This is a subject that, as Priscilla indicated, is very, very important to me because I have spent most of my last 20 years or so of my career trying to develop approaches and strategies and creating more consistent, effective, and highly comprehensive public engagement work at the institutional level. I'm very, very fortunate to have been in a place where getting faculty involved was no problem. But how do you institutionalize that impact for more sustainability and bigger impact? So I believe the critical question of our time is, how can universities like those that we all represent translate our tremendous physical, intellectual, educational, and political power into economic and social prosperity, as well as the overall quality of life for all members of our community? And we can do this in a scalable and a sustainable way, I believe, but it's going to take a lot of strategic thinking, a lot of commitment to make this happen. So how do we move? The fundamental question is that we always pose at every place that I've been. How do we move from being a university that offers public engagement programs to being a university that is truly and fully engaged with the communities that we serve? So that's the fundamental question of today. And I know Professor yesterday has touched on many of the things that I also fundamentally agree with. And so we'll see how much alignment that exists between his presentation and mine today. But how do we become anchors in our communities and partners for greater prosperity? That is something, that's a responsibility we should take very, very seriously. To give a little bit of context again for my remarks, in addition to the introduction that Priscilla gave, I am a plant physiologist by training and spent more than 34 and a half years leading a very large research program at the University of Minnesota, concurrent with probably the last 25 years of that as the Senior Vice President for Academic Administration, and had responsibility for moving Minnesota's public engagement activities in a way that I'm very, very proud of, and I'll talk a little bit more about later. And it was also noted, I've been around higher education now, getting a little long in the tooth, as they say, for about 43 years as a faculty member, Senior Vice President, and President of the University of Albany in New York, where I also drove public engagement. And I am entering my 6th year as the Chancellor of the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And I'm also a Vice President of the University of Illinois system. But one of my top priorities is how do we really drive public engagement at this world-class land-grant, largest public research university in the state of Illinois. So in my remarks today, I really do want to base my comments based on my personal and professional experience. My education and my career has been spent entirely within the sphere of American public university system. And most of that university experience has been as what we refer to as land-grant university. These, as I think most of you know, are a unique subset of the U.S. university system that was established in the 1860s. These land-grant universities were established with the specific charge to put information and education in the hands of the citizen with the express purpose of contributing to the economic, social growth of the communities around us. In some way by educating the underserved communities, and in other ways by taking that knowledge and applying it to bring about change in community. And of course, the specific challenges community face, whether you're talking about in Mid-America, Northeastern America, are going to vary in many respects from those that you may find in Cape Town or Rome or the United Kingdom or Shanghai, Brazil. But I do believe that geography and demographics and other core needs of our communities, there's a common thread that runs across these communities, and the impact of specific strategies are going to have to be nuanced and specific in some ways, but there are some common things that I think are going to serve or strategies that all universities can use to bring about change. There's one common thread that does tie all of this together, I believe, and holds true for all of us in global higher education. And that is we're going to have to be the anchors of our community and for engagement and economic development. Well, if we do this, we must understand the unique needs of our community and we must recognize the distinctive capabilities and the personal aspects and characteristics of our institution in order to be able to develop the systems and the programs and the processes that are the right ones and the right connections at the right intersection to bring about change, because we don't want to, my operating philosophy is to do no harm in general. But particularly, as Prof apparently said yesterday, we must do no harm to our communities. So we need to think more comprehensively and more broadly about our responsibilities. We just cannot continue to focus our attention on the 4 or 5 years of our undergraduate students' life and how we impact that from the day that they arrive on campus. But we must change our direction to focus more clearly and more squarely on cradle to career orientation that openly acknowledge our responsibility to prepare and to educate from birth and extends throughout a lifetime. I believe it's absolutely critical to have a full and honest understanding of place, both in terms of geographic locations and in terms of the hearts and minds of the members of a given community. This must guide the steps we take, the goals that we set, and the processes we put in place to align with these distinctive personalities of our respective institutions. And we have to be present where the people are, and we have to establish ourselves as a trustworthy partner in this collective mindset. And I think more critically important and perhaps more urgently, universities that fail to move forward more actively, more honestly, and more equally engaged in relationships with communities will not be the ones that are going to thrive and grow in the 21st century and beyond, because we are losing the public trust. And if we continue down the path that we're in now, in the next decades ahead of us, we will certainly lose more public trust. And I fundamentally believe that public engagement is the best way to restore trust by the public in our higher education system. So community engagement and public engagement can no longer be simply add-ons or optional components of our mission. They must become wholly integrated into our values and our operations, beginning as our organizing principles for our university. It is certainly can no longer be business as usual in higher education. It has to become, as we say at my place, business as unusual. And in the United States, we're seeing fundamental changes in funding models, shift to multiple and interdisciplinary research, changing student demographic, increased internationalization, different faculty expectations, and external pressures require our mission to meet current societal realities. So to both solve and really challenge and seize these opportunities, I do believe that we have to think and act differently. But I'm willing to wager that most of you will find resonance with the fact that things have changed. The need for public engagement has never been greater across this world, and we are the ones, and the responsibility for doing so runs squarely through our university. So those of us in our higher education can find ourselves immersed in a broad range of cultural and economic, political and local and regional and global issues, and many are around some of the questions and values and relevance of the impacted work we do. And so we find ourselves competing for time with other priorities and for funding and for public support. So we're really in a situation where students and citizens and governments we serve are demanding more and more of us, even as their trust and their support for our operation is certainly declining. And I'm not an economist, but I do know that this is not a sustainable model for our universities, whether you're talking about America or South Africa. And changing and improving the ways that we engage with our community is one way that we can start to restore trust and address societal changes. But we have to start locally and act more globally. So let me start with just a few principles, and then I'll give you a few examples, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. The 21st century approaches to community engagement, I believe, is predicated on three guiding principles, and some of these have already been mentioned yesterday. It has to be integrated with all aspects of our university work, our teaching, our research, and our outreach activities. Community engagement is not a separate mission, but a strategy to accomplish all of our missions. It is about working with communities, and this is one that's starting to resonate around the world rather than doing for or to communities. We need to think in terms of partnerships, not projects. We must move away from developing short-term projects or individual activities toward a more coordinated, systematic approach that emphasizes building partnership. And I'm very big on the notion of partnerships, because partnerships move at the speed of trust, and there has to be reciprocity if a partnership is truly going to work. The institutions that are emerging as leaders and most successful in this work are moving from being simple universities with engagement programs to ones that are comprehensively engaged universities. Engaged universities should reward faculty members who conduct scholarship that addresses important social issues. They embed social responsibility, focus ideals in their student academic programs, and they have systematic campus-wide strategies and agendas to put in place the policies and the structures around culture of engagement. But when you set out to build this kind of systemic approach, you also have to recognize that this process takes time. It requires institutional leadership, investment. It requires attention and prioritization. And one of the three universities where I have had the pleasure of serving across my 43-year career, one good example of a university that I believe has, just like UWC, has really thought about this very deeply and has really taken the issue of public engagement seriously and systematically integrated and it across the entire value system of the university. Goes back to an effort that I had the pleasure of starting about 20 years ago at the University of Minnesota. And I'll talk about just these three examples in these three universities very briefly. In the late 1990s, university identified that it needed to have a more coordinated effort across the university engagement with the local community. As a land-grant university, it had research and outreach centers in every geographical region of the state. We had extension offices and I'll get the number wrong, but it must have been something like 132 counties across the state of Minnesota. Very small state, but a lot of counties. And that work was systematic, it was supportive, but we felt that we really were not engaged. As being one of the few land-grant universities located in an urban community, it took a meeting with the community where the light finally went off in our heads. And when a member of the community asked us, say, well, what is the university's urban agenda? The president of the university looked at me, and I was the senior vice president, and I looked at him, and we both had to admit publicly, we really didn't have an urban agenda. But that was the point of departure for us to think more systematically about our role as the largest research university in the state of Minnesota. There's only two educational systems in that state of about 5 million people. And we had a responsibility, as I put it, as much responsibility to serve the community up in the Red River Valley, which is kind of the breadbasket of the Midwest. We had as much obligation to serve people in urban communities as we had to serve people in the breadbasket. Long story short, we embarked upon a strategy to renovate an old strip mall that had fallen into disrepair, and most of the stores were being closed. There were drugs being dealt right out front. Every morning I would drive by there on the way to work, and you could see the teenagers out there dealing drugs right next to a police precinct. And so to me, it became the most logical place to implement a strategy, a place-based strategy in the community. And after many conversations with the community, after being accused of trying to bring a Tuskegee experiment to North Minneapolis that is very heavily communities of color, we persevered and was able to renovate, purchase that old shopping center for over $1 million, even though I could have gotten it from the city for $1. I felt it wasn't the right thing to do. And we spent another $2 to $3 million renovating it. In 2009, it opened as the first place-based strategy by the university outside of its proper campus. And it was called the Urban Research Outreach and Engagement Center, or UROC. It is now a permanent community-based research center located in the heart of this underserved community that has long been disenfranchised and underserved by the city of Minneapolis and by the university. Population very diverse, economically challenged, and the residents were basically grown a bit tired of being the subjects of research projects for the university, but not having a sense of any voice in that, how that research was structured. And as they said to me unequivocally, we don't feel like you come here and you study us, you study our children, but we don't have any sense of ownership for the data. You know, and being a scientist, when they started talking about owning the data, I had to admit I was a little bit of pushback, but I began to understand exactly what they were saying. They wanted to understand and thought they deserved some feedback from the scholarship done on them so that they could use it to shape policy and to improve their communities. And so we're very, very proud. I think UROC is both an outreach and engagement center, and it's also a hub of community engagement that brings the community together in strategic ways. It also brings our researchers and university resources to pursue programs and initiatives that benefit the entire community. It's a wide range of activities, from nutritional programs to computer refurbishing programs, providing computers to members of the underserved community to deal with the digital divide, pre-K through 12 outreach programs, and just really has become a major resource for that community. And then let me compare that with the University at Albany, State University of New York at Albany, which I left Minnesota after 34 and a half years to become the president of SUNY Albany. University at Albany is one of 64 campuses within the massive SUNY system. It's the third largest research university in that system, located in Albany, New York, which is the state's capital. And it has a very high underserved population. And there was a desire, we created a desire to have a more educated workforce that was being fueled by the region's transformation into a medical science enterprise and a high-tech hub. It became a place where places like Global Foundries, one of the big chip manufacturers, decided to locate a major manufacturing operation. So at Albany, I want you to remember this if you don't remember anything else I said about Albany. Community engagement drove the academic strategy. Now, ask yourself how many places you know of where community engagement, desire to be more engaged with the community, actually drove the academic strategy. I was very pleased to catalyze the largest academic expansion in more than 50 years at University at Albany, and it was focused in large measure by our desire to create the academic programs that would allow us to have the biggest impact in the community. The prime example of that was the creation of a new school of engineering and applied sciences. This was a $60 million project that was very purposefully that rescued and renovated a decaying high school that was ironically on the edge of the downtown campus of the university, which was located in the heart of the underserved community. So we chose this location so that we could have a bigger impact on STEM education and to get the community to think differently about the possibilities and the role that the university had in driving more economic opportunity for underprivileged people from all social economic backgrounds. And so pleased that that space continues to be developed as really a business generator and a revitalization strategy for the entire what we call Hudson Valley region. And so very proud of what we were able to do there. And then lastly, I've been at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I'm 5 years and 30 days almost into my 6th year as Chancellor of this university. And this is a classic example of what can happen when you kind of lose focus. I was very excited to be back in the land-grant university, one of the largest universities in the country. Our enrollment just went up. That enrollment has grown almost 9,000 students since I came there in 2016. We're at about 56,300 students now. But much to my surprise, even though the university had touted its success as an engaged university, when I started as chancellor, I was surprised to learn that they had disinvested. They had cut the budget of the public engagement program. And those of you that know me, or based on what I said, you know that didn't sit well with me. And so we went about restructuring our public engagement effort. And don't get me wrong, we had more engagement at the individual faculty department level, I think, than any other university in higher education. However, that was not an institutional strategy. And so we've embarked upon a multi-million-dollar project where we are engaging and accelerating our engagement with community, with everything from the social justice work that was really catalyzed by the very, very tragic George Floyd death back in my home state and hometown of Minnesota, and other issues of racism and injustice in our society has been one of the rallying points for us to think and act differently about the role of the university in solving societal challenges, all the way from institutional racism to social injustice. We are leveraging the fact that we have one of the most highly regarded engineering schools in the country, if not the world. And how do we use that to infuse technology and resilience and economic development and workforce development into our communities? And you also heard me talk about being anchored locally, but you also have to be where the people are. Urbana-Champaign is your typical small university college town, about 200,000 people in the whole county. And about 44% of that is made up of people that work at the university. We're the largest employer as a university per se, and we have a very large research part, which is the 3rd largest employer. And the 2nd largest employer is the hospital system that we partnered with to start the first world-class engineering-based college of medicine. And so we're a big game in town, and from that concern, we have big responsibility. But of late, I've been advocating for the fact that we're only 120 miles away from the 3rd largest city in America, the city of Chicago, with about 9 million of the state's 12 million population concentrated there. I've got over 200,000 alumni there. And so I've been pushing the university that it has to have a strategic and high impact presence where the majority of the population is and where some of the greatest societal challenges are. And so we've been working very closely with the Chicago Public Schools to start thinking about how do you transform the process of teacher preparation, because I don't think we're going to get improvement in some of the outcomes until we change how teachers are trained. And also we got to do a better job of making sure more of our students are college ready. But let me just leave you with one example of how a big research idea also has a critically important public engagement element. About 2 years ago, Bob Zimmer, former president of the University of Chicago, came to me after American Association of American University meetings and said, I think we should go to the state and ask for $100 million for quantum computing to create this quantum computing center in Chicago. I agreed. Long story short, we asked for $100 million. The governor was impressed with the idea. He gave us $200 million. But it's not just about building this scientific hub. There's a critical social justice piece of this that is absolutely requiring us to think about how that quantum research facility is going to translate into jobs in the South Side of Chicago. How do you get people to think differently about STEM careers and possible careers in quantum? It is clearly one of the most exciting things that I've embarked upon. And I want to be respectful of the time. As you probably can tell, I could go on and on for another hour with this, but let me just say in conclusion, I am very, very honored to be part of this and very, very excited about the fact that this is work that we all need to be part of, and we can bring partnerships and networks together that are really going to be very, very transformative of our society. And we've always been present in communities that we're located, but we really do have to think about how do we develop reciprocal, big transformative ideas that certainly is going to continue to anchor us in those communities, but that will effectively make us a valuable resource for the 21st century and beyond. So let me end with that and say I'm truly honored to have this opportunity to spend a little time with you. And I certainly, this is something that I care greatly about, and I look forward to being able to address any questions you might have. Thank you so much, I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Professor Jones. That was very enlightening. We don't have any questions in the chat. Anybody want to Jones, any questions directed to Professor Jones? And Jones, you've silenced everybody. So, Prof. Daniels, is there anything you want to add?
I have a question, Professor Jones. If you are locally anchored, as you were mentioning, how do you ensure that you are still globally relevant? Because my concern about anchoring locally is that you could become so engrossed about just what's happening locally. Because I liked your example, for instance, about the computers, where you are aware of globally, we are moving to 4IR and even further along. And especially now with Corona, where everybody is working from home, and that is one of our biggest challenges. How do you mediate that gap so that you don't become so locally engrossed that you forget about the global context?
Well, I think that's a good question. And my answer is that because we are the land-grant university for the state of Illinois, we are one of the largest public research universities in the world. We have partnerships that educate. We have a global campus, for example, in China, where we educate several hundred engineering students every year. But so the answer, Professor Daniels, is that we have to do both, and we have to have place-based strategies. Because I can tell you, when we start talking about having a strategic and high impact presence in Chicago, it caused a little bit of concern for people in Champaign County and the city of Urbana-Champaign. And so we have programs that we're spending several millions of dollars to deepen those relationships in terms of STEM education, in terms of driving economic development, expanding the university owns the airport in our small community. How do we keep that critical asset? But at the same time, we're developing and are the anchors for something called Discovery Partners Institute. And I ask you to just Google Discovery Partners Institute, Chicago, and it will give you an example of why and how the University of Illinois system was able to work with us to get $250 million from the state of Illinois for the University of Illinois and other institutions, Northwestern, Chicago, Fermi Labs, to create this big research and innovation hub and engagement hub in the city of Chicago. So I guess to put it simply, Professor, that we have to do both, and you have to invest heavily in these place-based strategies. Because I can tell you, ultimately, we will be offering degrees through this. It's not trying to build another four-year campus, but it's going to be a research and innovation hub that's going to drive change in communities. So it's not just about the research. That the Discovery Partners Institute has a very aggressive agenda around K-12 education and economic development, creating jobs in the community. In fact, the governor's sister, Penny Pritzker, is donating millions of dollars to drive this innovation hub that is already reaching out and has tapped into a lot of young people that provides job and experience and learning opportunities they will not otherwise have a chance to participate in. So I guess to put it simply, we have to do both. We have to be anchored in Urbana-Champaign. But what I've said to my faculty, staff, and to the Board of Trustees, if we are only anchored and perceived to be anchored just in Urbana-Champaign, we will not be the world-class university that we are today in the next 20 to 25 years.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Jones. We have a question from Mr. Pokpas, actually two. Prof. Jones, how did you achieve scale and campus-wide coordination, and who coordinated cross-boundary engagement with local authorities and other anchor institutions?
Well, at every institution that I've been, we achieved the scale by, first of all, having deep conversations with the community. You know, and we did get some pushback. Well, why are you doing this in Minneapolis? St. Paul, the other part of the Twin Cities, has some of the same challenges. But my position was we needed to start somewhere. We had to start where the needs were greatest. We got support not only from the city of Minneapolis, but from the county commissioners as well. We got a bit of philanthropic support to help drive the initiatives. And we actually decided to do this place-based strategy. So where we converted this old shopping center to be our place-based strategy and to drive all of our activities through that strategy. If you did not have a partnership with the community, you couldn't have space within that center to drive your research and engagement. And so we were able to garner support from the Board of Trustees, as well as the local officials at the legislature to move forward in this direction. And it still stands today as a major driver for bringing new businesses to North Minneapolis, as well as hiring more people from underserved community. And I think the biggest thing that we found was kind of an unintended or not acknowledged consequence. We kind of suspected that no one had really invested in North Minneapolis for decades. And we felt that we could take a chance, and if we were willing to invest in it, others would follow suit. And that is exactly what has happened in the last 20 years or so. A lot of vacant lots are now office buildings. The county built a new building next door to the UROC, and they are started the transformation of the county's healthcare center, which is kitty corner from where UROC is located. So in many ways, we have to take risks. We got to build a coalition across multiple constituency groups. And part of that risk is investing in a neighborhood and showing that if the university can invest in it, what about the private sector? What about the nonprofit sector? And I think it's worked out beautifully so far.
Thanks, Prof. Jones. Prof. Fielding, your hand is up.
Thank you, Anita. Professor Jones, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I can say as a younger researcher, I'm amazed and astounded at the wisdom and the wealth of knowledge. So my question, I think, might be slightly unfair, but it's something that I've been grappling with. So I'm currently Director of Research, and my new portfolio next year is Dean of Research, but I'm also a researcher. So yes, we've seen during this pandemic that working as groups, especially internationally, with communities is extremely important for answering these very big life-changing questions. How do we still at universities give space to those lone wolves, free thinkers, who very often change the way we think and we end up being the Nobel laureates? Is there still a place for them in universities? And from your experience, how do we make room for them as well? Thanks.
This was
Just one correction, Prof. Fielding. Just one correction. You're not going to be Dean of Research. You're going to be the Dean of the Faculty of Natural Sciences.
Dean of Natural Sciences. My apologies.
Well, Prof, I had a bad connection. I'm afraid I didn't get part of what you said. So how do we make sure that we include people in the community? Was that your?
No, so we see that networks are very important. Community engagements are extremely important as well. But very often it's those lone wolves, free thinkers, individuals, who changes the way we think and can very often take research in a way that is unique. How do we still keep them in the system and create space for them as well in this new way of thinking?
Well, I can tell you one of the things, and we haven't implemented this at the level that we need to at Illinois, but I can tell you one of the things we were able to put in place very early at Minnesota was, how do you help the community? I raised a question about people being concerned that they don't own the data. And one of the things we found that was the problem is that we need to help communities better understand what research is and what it isn't, and what it can answer and what it cannot. And so one of the efforts we started was a year-long program on participatory action research. So you could actually come and participate in I think it was once a week training session. And we offered it up to nonprofit organizations and just community members to first of all understand participatory action research and how they could utilize that from their own individual perspectives to find solutions and to do the research and analysis that were needed to drive their own agendas at their own institutions. And so I think that's one of the best ways to get that buy-in and to get people to understand. Because in some of these underserved communities, because of what happened with the Tuskegee experiment, and as you're seeing playing out now with the COVID-19 vaccines, and even some of the testing protocols, there are a lot of suspicions around the word research. It conjures up a very negative thought in their minds. And part of it is because of the unethical things that have been done around research. But how do we counter that with more structured educational programs to get folks to understand the value proposition of research? Because I can tell you, it is frustrating. We were talking about this yesterday at my AAU meeting. We don't do a good enough job of helping people to understand that it was research that started more than 30 years ago that allowed us to have these 2 mRNA vaccines, first in the history of the world, and delivered in a shorter period of time than using the old traditional approach. And of that knowledge came out of research universities, not only American universities, but research universities. And so we got to do a better job of helping people to understand the value proposition in creating knowledge that our universities play, and help them to better understand the value proposition and as the way that they should not be suspicious of research universities, but really should be engaging them as partners to find solutions. I hope I addressed your question, Prof. That's what I garnered from what you were asking. I hope I covered that.
Yes, thank you.
I see Rachel Mobakela with her hand up. I think I know her from someplace. So, Bona Johnny.
Good morning, Chancellor. Good afternoon, colleagues in South Africa. The question that I have is, so Chancellor, in your remarks, you talked about the value of having global partnerships. And in the extensive career, more than 4 decades that you've had at various ranks of the university, you've had the pleasure of working with global partners. So the question that I have is, what insights would you share to help us understand how we engage global partners, particularly in contexts where partnerships might not necessarily be, partners might come to the table with slightly different needs. And so how do we use a partnership relationship to meet what might on the surface appear to be have sometimes conflicting or different needs of different partners, so that they both become or derive mutual benefit from that relationship?
Well, you've already used a word that really answers the questions, Ray, too. I think partnerships, as I said earlier, move at the speed of trust. And so first, there has to be some trusting basis for working together. And I think the second realization is not everyone is going to bring the same things to the table. But at the end of the day, you have to also acknowledge, and this has been difficult, I think, for universities here in this country, and partnering with communities, you have to acknowledge that universities don't have all the data. We don't have all the knowledge. That there's a tremendous amount of knowledge that exists in our communities. And the biggest question for us is how do you leverage that knowledge with the knowledge that exists in the community and create an environment where there's mutual benefit. It's all about creating mutual benefit. So you don't have to, what good, I won't learn very much from a partnership with somebody that has the same set of expertise and knowledge that I have. We always want to bring somebody to the table with a different perspective. And how do you do that in a way that's respectful and is really framed around the notion of mutual benefit? That's been in the operational framework from my perspective for every successful partnership that I've been engaged with. It's around mutuality, and it's about respecting and acknowledging the information and knowledge that exists in communities, and how do we create a collective impact strategy to bring about a substantive and sustainable change? It clearly has to be the model, because otherwise nobody wants to spend time feeling like that they are not a real partner, and that the other large entity may have some motives that are not exactly aligned with the best needs for the institution they're trying to partner with. So it's all about mutual respect. It's all about mutual benefit from my perspective. And I try to approach every one of our domestic or global partnerships with that framework and that set of principles in mind.
Thank you, Prof. Jones. And thanks, everybody. I put something in the chat because I think we've run out of time, Prof. Jones. Thanks so much. This is because your talk was so engaging and so exciting. And thank you for making it so relevant for us to understand. And one of the take homes that we can think of is, which struck me, was that the partnership takes as long as the trust is taking to develop. And that's one of the key lessons about developing partnerships, because partnerships are not just the product. Partnerships focus on the process as well. And so giving us examples to make us realize, although communities are in our mission, we're not only referring to the immediate communities, we're thinking about communities where the need is the greatest as well. So, and the notion of we start locally and we spread globally, that is an amazing and a profound thought to leave with us. So thank you very much for that enlightening speech. We appreciate it, and we are so privileged to have you in our midst and as a partner. going forward. So thank you so much. Prof. Daniels, how do we take the time from now? I'm sorry, we went over time. And until what time would the virtual break be, please?
I think maybe we should just make it 5 minutes. Or maybe you should ask our audience if they want to continue. I don't know, what does Kunal say? I'll be in trouble with my technical person if I just make a decision. What do you say, Kunal?
It's an engagement colloquium after all, so let's hear how people feel. I think it would be good if everybody at least takes a leg stretch, but I also understand there's a lot of anxiety amongst all of us with being on backup battery power for lots of things. So we can definitely afford 5 minutes because we can adapt the program even later on to the panel session this afternoon. But if people feel no, their battery can only last this long, then we can continue, Prof.
So can we have a show of hands for 5 minutes or not? So shall we just make a decision, Kunal? We give a 5-minute break?
I think so, Prof. If people are worried about battery power, then they can log out and back in again. So that would also help. I see Vicky has raised her hand. Maybe it's to indicate. You can unmute, Vicky.
I
think she meant 5 minutes. So that's
okay.
Okay, so 5 minutes it is, and it's 3 o'clock, and we're all back right at 15:05.
Thank
you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Prof. Jones.
Good afternoon, everybody. Once again, welcome to the second day of the Community Engagement Colloquium. I'm Gail Kaler, and I'm honored to be chairing the panel discussion focusing on local impact with international relevance. I believe that the issue of societal impact is of critical importance too. We know that engagement of communities is part of the UWC DNA makeup, embedded in its commitment to foster reciprocal and inclusive partnerships. This was patently evident from the inputs of the deans yesterday, and I'm sure our panel will expand on this later. We also know that scholarly engagement is of critical importance for the social impact of universities. I'm now going to turn over to our first panelist, Mr. Larry Popkus. Larry, over to you.
Ms. Kayla, good afternoon, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm just trying to see if I can share the screen. 1 second, please. Everybody able to see my screen?
Yes, yes, we
can.
And I'll just go into it, this mode if I can. Right. Thank you for the invitation and good afternoon, everyone again. And it's good to, Ms. Kayla, to see you again after so many years, although virtually. The few points that I want to raise around anchoring institutions today. I want to make 4 points, but I've got kind of 8, 9 slides for it, but I'll rush through it. But the first point is just to locate this within a sense of purpose. The second is to talk about anchoring institutions and then to contextualize this within the UWC context. And fourthly, just to draw on some lessons that we've learned and then the conclusion. So the IOP, or the Institutional Operating Plan, was done under the theme Connecting Possibilities. And I want to talk about the connecting possibilities in, or the connecting possibilities of, anchoring places. Now, just as an introduction, 3 slides. The first is, I don't have to preach to the converted today that, you know, engagement and anchoring is part of the ethos and part of the DNA of the institution, and that these efforts actually abound within the organization, leading to rising expectations. More recently, the university has adopted or amended its mission statement and inserted in its mission statement the anchor mission as a subset of its engagement ethos. So here comes the first challenge that I want to put to you. How, as an institution, do we realistically lend thoughtful support to deepen our understanding and accelerate action to redress some of the disparities in society, while at the same time reaping the transformative benefit of the multiple efforts that's happening on a university-wide scale? And there is a cross-cutting area established, and Professor Levak will lead that area about helping us to understand how, as an institution, we engage with this. The second point in this introduction, I don't have to remind you of the story of UWC. Some people would refer to this as a story of struggle. I prefer to talk about the story of optimism and agency and unlocking untapped potential. That the university was founded in the 60s with very little hope of what it should contribute to society apart from upholding apartheid. It defied the apartheid legislation, the ideological grounds on which it was founded, and effectively became an agent of transformation and the intellectual home of the democratic left under Professor Gerwel, which led to a number of opportunities for the institution to attract talent from all over, students, staff, etc., from all over. Unfortunately, the dawn of democracy and the euphoria of the time was the Achilles heel of the university when it lost significant intellectual and other capabilities. 1/3 of the university staff became the ministers in President Mandela's cabinet. We lost the rector, we lost senior staff to government agencies, etc. And so it took quite some time to rebuild the institution and its intellectual recovery. So here comes the question, drawing on that proud history, how does one now reimagine the university's future role, but different in evolution? And the key point here is that this is not a static process, it's a dynamic process of building a better society, whilst at the same time consistently making or becoming UWC. with those two book titles. So I want to just, as a concluding to the introduction, just use the story of the Choluteca Bridge, which I used earlier in the previous presentation, of the bridges in Honduras and South America having to withstand the strong hurricanes. And so they built this bridge designed to withstand the strongest hurricane. And in 1998, Hurricane Mitch permanently, as you can notice on here where the bridge is, that it permanently changed the course of the river, rendering the bridge effectively useless. And so my key point here is about purpose. It is about a bridge that does not serve its purpose, as although it may be firmly anchored. And so our understanding of anchoring an institution has to be firmly understood within the sense of purpose, sense of mission. And maybe that question at the bottom may be important for you. Two brief slides about anchor institution literature. It's place-based, usually called sticky institutions because it can't move. It's deeply rooted in its local geographies, and it can play an integral role in the social and economic revitalization of their surroundings. And it needs to simultaneously achieve shared value. So here comes the issue of reciprocity, which is something still need to be debated and understood within the institution. But I think the key point here is that an anchor mission and anchoring is a tool for the university, or a more methodical approach. It is a means to an end and not an end in itself. And maybe just to summarize on the literature, it therefore deals with the university's spatial immobility. And I want to just caution you about place-based connections, that this is not about know your place and stay in your place and stay in your location, because in the South African context of apartheid, one needs to think of spatial transformation too. The university has formal status, corporate status if you wish, a formal legislative mandate, and within that mandate, it has the ability to influence and to impact. It's called anchor institutions because of its land holdings, because of the sheer size of staff and students, its purchasing power. And maybe the last 2 points for me would be more critical, that mission alignment, having this in the mission, is to commit to greater purposes, to a social justice, human rights, democracy, and good citizenship agenda. This is an area where both universities and communities have a vested interest in their surroundings, but unfortunately, this potential is largely untapped. So against that background, let's just look at the context of UWC. So here I want to raise 3 challenges. The one is a challenge of scale, a challenge of collaboration and collaborative infrastructure, and the challenge of making wise choices. Now, on the left-hand side, on my left-hand side, you have South Africa with the Western Cape being the province, Western Cape here. And then in that corner, in a sense, southwestern corner, you have the Cape metropolitan area. And within the Cape metropolitan area where this cursor is now, that's where you have UWC. So in a sense, it's equidistant from Cape Town to the University of Stellenbosch here, to Mitchell's Plain, and maybe to the north. So there is an issue of the university's location. Maybe I should say within the hinterland of where poverty starts and ends in the Western Cape. Also note its proximity to the peri-urban areas, the farm areas, like Stellenbosch farms, in close proximity. And the university has some intention to deal with locations of peri-urban and rural communities. So if you take this slide and you look at the right-hand side, the same where Cape Town is, the university is exploring in its strategies anchoring the institution along the main corridors, which is Voortrekker Road and Symphony Road, Durban Road. Durban Road will become Symphony Road at some point. And it is locating a campus in Woodstock, close to the campus, Cape Town CBD. It has, this is where the university is located. It has set up, this is a bit disproportionate, but it has set up the Belleville campus with some facilities in Belleville. It has a campus in Mitchell's Plain, and then it's got its Tygerberg and other campuses. So the issue here is one of scale. Whether one deals with the project level where the individual might work, or program level, or at the node level, like a building, or a precinct or corridor level, etc. And this is one of the challenges. And we are working within the Tygerberg partnership to deal with issues of a collaborative infrastructure. How do we talk then to multiple role players, and where's the forum to deal with that? Now, just two examples of these anchoring strategies. The one is an approach of catalytic urban revitalization. I don't have to speak to this issue. You know that the university has set up a campus in Belleville in order to influence other role players in helping to establish a more conducive environment for students, etc. And I think the last point on this slide is that how do we as a community help to understand the potential stakeholder influences and the community needs in that area. The second last.
Mr. Poppers, sorry,
Yes.
if I can just come in here, you're on time. I just wanted to check how much more time you were going to be requiring.
I've got 2 more slides after this. I'm almost done.
Okay, thank you.
The second example that I want to give is that the university is in the process of expanding its footprint. This is that's where the campus is, with the railway line behind the campus. And this is the Belhar development. And the university has acquired 3 pockets of land plus another set of land, and it's negotiating with the city there. But the point is that very soon when we return, we'll not just have 2,700 extra beds, but a neighboring community of 16,000 residents. And this becomes a challenge for the university in terms of a high density area. And how do we create the collaborative infrastructure with different spheres of government who are co-owners, city, province, etc., in how one builds a neighborhood. So having said that, second last slide, this is what lessons have we learned? That none of these examples are the same. They're contextually different. There's no one size fits all. We learned that it's very messy to work with different spheres of government. It takes long. We do have the ability to influence and create placemaking, but it will require the collaborative effort to take the long haul on this. In the end, this is about people all with an interest participating and working to make this work. Just coming back in conclusion to this slide of the bridge, I think we are challenged to seize the opportunity to engage and use our anchor missions to forge a more meaningful and impactful university community relationship in order to build an inspiring sense of a future for all of us. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks so much, Mr. Poppers. I'm going to move on to Professor Fielding. Prof, you can go right into your presentation now.
Thank you so much. Can everybody see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Thank you, Gail. Chair, Professor Levak, Professor Daniel, thank you for this opportunity. I'm very excited about this 3 days. It will be a very difficult task to speak after the previous 2 speakers, who has obviously a very wealth of knowledge, and but I look forward to this. Thank you. So I've been Director of Research at UWC for close to 5 years. And the biggest challenge that I've really faced is changing this mindset that we see on the screen at the moment. As researchers, we are programmed that if you do not publish, then you will perish, so your career is over. And really what researchers were, or scientists were, less than 100 years ago, and what we have today are two vastly different definitions. So it's extremely challenging because yes, our subsidies are extremely important, and we get our subsidies from our publications and our outputs and our creative outputs. So irrespective of whether we're looking at local collaborations in research or international collaborations, the challenge is really the same. How do we change mindset from researchers? So what am I really talking about? When I'm talking about changing the mindset of researchers, it is really about this national discussion that is happening at the moment. And I'm very excited that our colleague from the Nrf is speaking in the same session, because they currently speaking about a dialogue or creating a dialogue and very far advanced in that dialogue in really defining what research impact is. So the question that I would like to pose is, what is research impact? Is it defined in terms of academic impact or societal impact, or is it both? And both of those are extremely important for the stakeholders involved in this process. I like the definitions that I found on various sites. If you look at the one definition was, research impact really refers to the diverse ways in which research can benefit individuals, yes, organizations, but nations through increasing effectiveness of public service, policy, and for me, extremely important, the impact on the society. So what impact do we have on society? And this is the conversation that I've been having with researchers at UWC for the past, for my past term, the past nearly 5 years. Yes, you have research. Yes, it answers very important questions, but ultimately, what is the goal? And the pandemic, I think one positive we can take from it is that this is not just about the individuals and the organizations, it is about doing research for the greater good. So really, this goes beyond the contribution to academic research. And then I really like this last definition taken verbatimly from Grokudu's blog. Impact or research impact is important because it helps keeps us focused on the overall purpose rather than the process of research. And what do I mean by this? If you look at this, this is typically when I have a conversation with my students or a researcher, this is typically the conversation that I would have. This is a project management plan for research, and it really starts with an idea. Then we look at partners, whether they're being collaborative partners locally or internationally. We look at funders, we look at staffing, we look at what will we do with that IP in the end. So we speak to a research office, we speak to tech transfer office. And then once all of those are in place and we've sent in our proposal and we receive funding, we then go into the activities. Now we have these various stakeholders that become involved in the research, and typically they are the researchers only. Those funding proposals will speak about outputs and outcomes, and you see over here I have this last one highlighted in red because I think this is where we're missing the boat very frequently. For many researchers, the process stops over here before it gets to that impact. So how do we change this conversation? This is really about a conversation about planning and as early as possible, engaging with communities that can be impacted. So what am I trying to say? It should really be about doing research that is relevant. And we have various guiding documents that speaks very broadly to those needs of our communities and what is needed to take the communities forward and to develop those communities. And you have just listed the NDP 2030, UWC's IOP, the SDGs, and Blue Sky Research I have in there because my question still is, Blue Sky Research is important because it can lead to other questions as well. But you will see I have something over there that I think is extremely important and that we leave out very, very often, communities. How are we allowing communities to, and I almost want to use the very strong words, to collaborate and almost dictate to us what type of research they are willing to work on with us. And to give an example, Hoodia, the appetite suppressant, Khoisan people have been chewing it on it for thousand years to suppress appetite. And when they would go hunting, they would be chewing on this plant product, and the person could run for ages and ages and ages and ages. There was an engagement with the Khoisan community, but the question really is, yes, from a science perspective, it was understood, but what was the impact on that community? Did it lead to improve living conditions for that communities? Did it increase job opportunities? And how much engagement was right at the outset? So that red arrow that appeared last is really where I think the impacts block should move to. And we should really be engaging with that block before we go through this whole process, because this is really what would answer all of those various questions. So let me give you an example. And I think, once again, the pandemic has given us an amazing opportunity to really see how this came into play. So our colleagues from dentistry, and you know that the dentists are at extremely high risk. They work in the mouths of potentially infected, COVID-infected individuals, and the risk to exposure is extremely high. So we had a need, engagement by that group of 3 researchers with this community and with the patients to see what would be comfortable and what their needs are. Coming up with an idea, finding a potential solution, doing the scientific studies and ending up with a paper in a very prestigious journal. But what does that mean? It means absolutely nothing to the community out there. That led to a product being designed. And that product has been patented by UWC and minimizes the risk significantly to the dentist working on a potentially infected patient. So you can see this is one where there is a direct impact from research on a particular community, dentists. So what Professor Jones raised a very important point, that we need to communicate. So after we have those publications, and yes, we have the patents, that is still this traditional way of thinking. What else is missing? I think we've never seen the level of distrust ever in the history of science that we're currently seeing in academics from the wider community. Social media is driving discourse in various disciplines, and to use COVID as an example again, even COVID. So it's become our responsibility to take that research and yes, develop it into products, but also to communicate. And these are the various ways of communication. And you will see there is even some international communications, some local communications. So it's really building the trust of the community. And once you have that trust, communities are willing to be working with you. One step further, it is not just about taking it into one platform. Social media and other forms of media has created so many opportunities. And as you can see, UWC in various aspects over this past 3 years, impacting communities directly. That's from our colleagues from CHR, community, from arts, puppeteering, various colleagues speaking on television and on radio, vaccination centers and sharing facts. And then I think what we very often forget, and this is my last slide, Yes, there is research that brings in funding for the university. That's a plus. There is engagement with a community. So we build trust with that community. That's a plus. That builds our standing. That's a plus. It brings in extra collaborators. That's a plus. This is a slide, and it's only based, and it's from our media office colleagues. And this is my last statement. Over this past year or so, during this pandemic, just over a year, I asked them pull coronavirus engagement, media engagements, and just look at this. Potentially, we had 806 million engagements from the community, social media engagements based on readerships and viewerships. What does that mean for the university? In the end, and this is a term that I learned only end of last year, advertising value equivalency, 25.698 million rand. So just engaging with communities, going out there, speaking to newspapers, writing those op-eds, taking that research 5 steps further has essentially led to the university receiving 26 million rand worth of advertising. So you can see that it's not just about international and national collaborations between researchers. It is also about collaboration with communities, but then that engagement does not stop once we have the data. What do we do with that afterwards? And it's sharing that data in a way that the communities can understand. This is something that I'm very passionate about, and this is something that I will definitely take forward, and I encourage all faculties to have this discussion with, especially the young researchers, right from the start in the planning phases. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Prof. Fielding. You preempted just as I was going to tell you, you're on time. You said you only have, that's your last slide.
Thank you so much.
Well done. So we now have Mr. Michael Ellis. And it's such a good flow of presentations because Prof. Fielding raised some important questions in his presentation. So over to you, Mr. Ellis.
Yeah, thank you so much for the, I want to start off by thanking Prof. Daniels just for inviting us to the conversation. You know, it's so valuable, I think, for the NRF to be involved in these conversations and see the thinking or hear the thinking and see the developments at a university. And certainly, as Prof. Jones pointed out, a university that's really in many sense leading the way when it comes to community engagement and really from an innovation perspective, looking at these things quite differently and innovatively. So really a valuable conversation, and I think significant congruence, hopefully, with what I'm going to be talking about and presenting. Prof. Daniels asked me to present on societal impact, looking at it from a policy context in South Africa. I'm going to look at it through 2 essentially NRF policies or frameworks, agendas that we've been working on. The one mentioned already by Prof. Fielding, and that's the Nrf Research Agenda, a Research Impact Agenda, sorry. I'll also link that with a fairly more recent development, looking at engaged research and how that contributes into the Research Impact Agenda that we have set for ourselves. The Research Impact Agenda is now published. It's online, the Nrf framework to advance the societal and knowledge impact of research. I think it's important for us to start and just discuss what are we meaning, at least by NRF, when it comes to impact. We've defined impact as that what's on the screen, a beneficial change in society or knowledge advancement brought about as direct or indirect result of the NRF's research support interventions, whether planned or unintended, immediate or long term. So a number of variables there. And the one thing that brings it all together is beneficial change. You know, that we see impact, we're focused on impact in a positive direction that's bringing a beneficial change to broader society. But yet with an understanding that sometimes we realize impact and the impact pathway is not always clear cut. So sometimes you realize impact through the research process that is unintended, but is still of benefit to society. And sometimes that takes a short amount of time. Other types of impact will take a much longer period of time. We, however, do look at it through these very distinct lenses. Distinct lens of a knowledge impact and societal impact. I think Prof. Fielding referred to that as academic impact. So we've defined these two areas of impact, or two lenses to look at impact through. The first, knowledge impact, obviously, is the advances that we're making in our scientific understanding. So understanding how we're interpreting data, how we the methods we're using to do that, the theories, applications of that. So that's this kind of area of knowledge impact, which is really, as has been pointed out, has been quite a focus, in many of our policies that we set up in South Africa. We've talked about publish or perish kind of type of policies, and that has for many years been I think a focus for us. But there's the second leg, and really we're discussing that at length today, and that's the societal impact. So the value of that research adds to society across various fields or spheres. And we look at these three different elements: so societal, economic, and environmental, but also look at it in a positive sense. It's the adding value to the quality of people's lives in South Africa and more broadly. So if we're able to essentially focus and look at both of these, and sometimes we'll need to be looked at independently, and sometimes in a more integrated kind of approach. That's led us now as the NRF to start looking at an engaged research agenda. And really the intent here is that we see that the mode in order for us to attain knowledge and societal impact is to ensure that there is effective engagement within the research process. So really setting out the kind of aims of what we're trying to achieve through looking at engaged research and setting an engaged research agenda for the NRF is to firstly look at a shared understanding of what we are meaning across the NSI, or the National System of Innovation, when we talk about this term engaged research. Often what we are coming to know through our engagements with universities and other stakeholders in the sector is that terminology often is quite disparate, but often the intent or the objective of what is trying to be achieved is there are similarities. So the shared understanding of what is engaged research and what maybe within different contexts is aiming at the same objectives as we are terming when we talk about engaged research. The next kind of intent for us to look at engaged research in the NRF is essentially to provide a strategic position through which we as NRF can support engaged research and more deeply embed it across the research infrastructure in South Africa. Obviously, when it comes to actually administering this as a funding agency, we need to be able to set up metrics and processes by which we can design and implement and assess the effectiveness of engaged research. So that's one element of what we're looking at as well. And then also to develop networks and promoting growth of localized engaged research capacity. Because as I pointed out earlier, across the research or the university system in South Africa, we see that different universities are almost further down the line when it comes to research engagement and societal impact. And really it's to create these networks and promote growth across the university sector and research sector in South Africa. From a policy perspective, and leading up to the point where we are now, there's been many developments, and some of these you would be very familiar with. I'll take us back to 1996 to the white paper on science and technology. And really in that there's a focus on scientific literacy, which has been a focus kind of in many of the policies over the years and up to the point in South Africa, but really focused on awareness. So essentially making the broader public aware of and understand and increase the understanding of the general public as to what is science and what are the scientific discoveries and inventions that have already come to pass. So it was almost a downstream type of activity of raising awareness about what is going on in science. The research and development strategy links that to human capacity. So essentially says, well, we need to raise public awareness of science and understanding of it, because we need more skills in the sector, in the research sector. So to build the research sector, we need to develop that interest. And that was kind of the link when it comes to engagement in the research and development strategy. More recently, in 2015, the Department of Science and Technology established what they call their science engagement strategy. And that has 4 different aims that it's set. The one is kind of this very much an awareness aim to popularize science. The next is to develop a critical public, which starts to look at more of a two-way kind of engagement between broader society, feeding back into research. And the 2 other aims to promote science communication and to profile research or South African research. More recently then in 2019, the white paper, the updated white paper on science, technology and innovation introduces this term responsible research and innovation, which really starts to focus more on engagement of all societal actors across the research cycle, and that's responding to specific societal challenges and developing joint solutions now between broader society and research. This is also then brought into the National Research Foundation amended Act, and as well as then in our vision, we quite strongly lay out our intent of setting a research impact agenda, as well as then a engaged research agenda. I'll now take you on a little bit of the more recent kind of developments and thinking that's with regards to engaged research within the NRF. So in our various dialogues that we've had up to now, we are starting to kind of formalize how we're viewing engaged research. So NRF at the moment positions our engaged research as research that integrates considered approaches to engaging communities and society in and with research across the full cycle, ensuring communities are primary stakeholders, active contributors, as well as beneficiaries of research. It also encompasses the multitude of ways that researchers interact with stakeholders and communities over the various phases of research. So we need to ensure that in our thinking about engaged research, that we are not overly restrictive, because engagement can happen in many different settings, in many different ways, with a multitude of different types and groupings of stakeholders. And we see that as an important thing to define in how we view engaged research. We see it as it needs to aim to improve public trust in science and enhance democratization of science, and also improve this relationship between science and society. So with this kind of positioning of what engaged research is, what this term is, we then have been drafting a set of principles which are still in their draft format, and kind of we're discussing on various different forums at the moment. And I'll present these draft principles to you now, because I think, again, there's great congruence between what's been discussed and said already in the session with some of these principles. So the first principle looks at active...
Ellis, if I can just come in here, sorry, I think it's important that we see the principles, but you over time at the moment. So I just want to check back with you how much time you need.
I'll flip through the 5 principles very quickly. So I'll maybe a minute, would that be all right?
Fine, absolutely fine.
All right. So the first principle looks at active citizenship, just meaning that a scientist sees themselves as an active part of society, that their research is for a common good. The second principle looks at the principle of reciprocity. So for mutual benefit, that research is conducted for mutual benefit, and really that there's equal standing amongst partners in this kind of knowledge co-production scenario, and that there's specific values that we see that need to be established. So trust, honesty, empathy, accountability, and Ubuntu as being fundamental to ensure that that's achievable. Next is the trans and interdisciplinary knowledge, nature of knowledge production. So really that we advocate for that researchers are working across kind of academic disciplines towards active transformation. And And then ethics and sustainability. This must all be underpinned by ethical standards, which sometimes are different for engagement, research engagement, to kind of normal kind of research practices, and essentially will act towards the intent of beneficence and non-malfeasance, and including the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. And then lastly, relationship building. This can't be done without established relationships, and often over extended period of time. Someone was commenting in the chat box about even over the COVID period, having lost those relationships because civic organizations have closed down and so forth. So that relationship building needs to be maintained and built over a course of time, and sometimes that's quite long term. All right, I'll end there. It's just a small quote from our CEO, and also just to mention that we've got a grant coming out for inclusive community-based research, which will be published in the next couple of weeks, which may be of interest to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ellis.
Sure.
I know that we are kind of pressed for time right now, and I wanted to ask if you could just all start typing your questions in the chat box, if that's possible, while we're going to Dr. Hart. How are you doing for your presentation? Can we go straight into your presentation right now?
We can.
Okay, thank you. So I'm handing over to Dr. Hart right now.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I think for me, it's even more of a chase and a challenge than what Prof Fielding said, prior to all the other speakers. But I think I've sort of been saved by the bell, so to speak, because what I'm going to present, although it's quite a bit technical, the benefit is in the program booklet. We've put just a short half-pager with the diagram, with the topology on page 8. So it might feel like death by sprint through a topology, but we felt it good to share with you what is the scholarship of engagement topology. Myself and Prof Daniels, we've been working on this for yonks, actually, I think 2014, 15, and every time we sort of grab this table and then move on it. And I've also uploaded the presentation on the web blog, so feel free to download it. It's in the open source community, and so you can use it as you see fit. So today, I just want to take us quickly through what is community engagement and how is it, in other words, scholarship. So we've heard since yesterday, and a lot of us have seen even with the Dean from CHS, Prof Rhoda, she referred to the different scholarships, and Prof Daniels presented on the scholarship model. And so if we look at it, one very critical aspect of scholarship of engagement is that it's a process that's evolution and transformation. So it's not just transferring of information from one to another. So it also links to what Prof Levak mentioned yesterday with mode 1 to mode 2. And so if we look at higher education and say, so what is engagement? Then there's 3 general distinguishing elements. The first one is it is definitely scholarly, and I think Prof Fielding touched very well on it, and Prof Jones in his keynote was giving us some great examples. So it's both an act and it's also a process. And as our keynote speaker linked us to, how do we make sure it's reciprocal? The second one is that it cuts across the mission of all 3 core functions. So the core functions, we spoke a lot about it yesterday and we'll yell it all the time. It's about teaching, it's about research, and it's about what we call service, or what the term is later changed to engagement. And then lastly, this very issue of how is it reciprocal and how is it mutually beneficial? How do we get it right? And Prof Fielding indicated in his presentation maybe a bit of movement of where the impact block should be. And I like what Mr. Ellis now indicated on how does the NRF see it and how does policy now begin to work for us. So if we look at these elements and we then say, right, how do we action the model? How do we action the scholarship of engagement model? And how do we sort of get into this motion of how do I track, monitor, and evaluate, in other words, my impact, my scholarship impact. And so, yeah, hold your horses, because I'm going to take you through something that's going to look quite wild on the screen, but I'm going to take you very briefly to how to read the topology. And then I invite you to please, through the blog, through emails, post questions, ask us about it, contact the unit, because the scholarship of engagement topology will highlight community engagement types. It will show how you can bring in the national development plans or the national drivers, even if you're from a different country, and how you bring in the sustainable development goals. And how do you look at what is sort of your key focus area and the different community types that we spoke about yesterday. So this topology, in other words, takes in Boyer's model of scholarships, but we've also taken in Button's community types or community engagement types, so to speak, and we've added a few. So right here at the top, you will see it starts with the different community engagement types. So there's a technical engagement, we get a cultural engagement, we get a political engagement, economic engagement. And so if we say, right, that's the engagement that we have, then we need to have the different focus areas, as I've mentioned, what drives me for each type of engagement, who's the community, we spoke about it, communities of academic scholars, student communities, business, industry, civil society. Boyer's scholarship, so what type of the scholarships is it? Who's the partners that I take on board? How does it align with the National Development Plan Vision 2030 of South Africa? And how does it align with the Sustainable Development Goals? So I'm just briefly going to go through this for the sake of time so that we make up time for all of you. And so if we look at technical engagement, the first thing we will say is, right, so my key focus is here to be pedagogical. And how effective is that? And so I will see it's about being a better teacher and being better at learning. And so Prof. Lebach always refers to learning and teaching, not teaching and learning. And it's because the more we make sure we engage and the more we make our research and our connections and partnerships relevant, the better we become even in our classrooms with our student community. So who's the main community in this technical engagement? Is academia, the academic scholars and the students. And so what Boyer's scholarship is the most relevant here? The scholarship of theory and practice. But who do we need to partner with? Because as academics and students, we can have these discussions and we can see how do I apply things from theory into practice. But I need public service, I need private service, I need NGOs, community-based organizations. So I need very many people involved if I want to influence my teaching to be applicable. And it links to graduate attributes, work readiness, etc. And then we've indicated which of the 15 chapters of the National Development Plan, although it cuts across, but sort of the main ones, and which of all the Sustainable Development Goals can one actually touch on. So colleagues, if you go through the process by each one of them, the cultural one, I've highlighted it sort of slightly in a different color so that you can cut across and see how it is to get all these different scholarships together. You will see that the idea is actually to think of an intervention or innovation approach, an engagement with partners, a project, a research study, a teaching and learning approach. So it's actually to try and touch on each one of these types of engagements, and so that I can touch also through all Boyer's different scholarships, because only then can I actually claim scholarship of engagement. Otherwise, I can only claim scholarship of theory or scholarship of integration or scholarship of innovation. So this is in a nutshell, and we want you to sort of look at it, read a bit on page 8 about it, although that's also just short. Think about it, say, can this work? How will it work? Is it something that can help me as a tool beforehand to sort of say, how is my initiative going to make a difference? Mr. Ellis has now indicated about an NRF call that comes out. And so the NRF started a few years ago to say, you must indicate what will be your community engagement. How does this align with national and international drivers? So this is why the topology can help a bit with it. So I leave you with the following. A scholarship should be reflected and it should show in all the strategic decisions of universities. And it must be visible in all our strategic partnerships, whether it's between academic and students, whether it's between students and communities. It needs to show, it needs to cut across, as Prof. Levak also indicated, it needs to be infused. We mustn't see scholarship of engagement as something separate from the three core functions. And it must be professional, knowledgeable, and well organized. So we mustn't tone it down and say, no, this is just something other. It's just something by the way. No. If I apply this topology, I can actually start thinking of monitoring and evaluation systems, of developing indicators. Those of you who know me, that's my first love. I just love to do impact studies and have theory-driven, smart indicator processes. And so I think universities can, if we start applying something like this, we can develop our indicators beforehand. That block of impact can move to the beginning during the planning, because we can plan with targets in mind that we broadly consulted in a reciprocal manner with our client, being whoever the specific community is that we partner with, and so that we in the end can prove the social impact. Or in America, we refer to it as broader impacts. How do we prove the footprint? And so I leave you just with a few points that you can do a quick brainstorming exercise after today or tonight. Think of the work, your work environment. Say to yourself, my work environment and what I would like to do. Which relevant divisions or departments, schools, units, faculties, etc., departments can link with this initiative of mine? Looking now at the topology. Then think of my initiative that I want to investigate or want to use for engagement, and say, if I do this, what will it contribute? And to which communities? So now we think, is it student, is it business, is it NGO sector, is it public sector? Remember, we try and aim for all, but it's not always possible for. And then I take my topology and I start plotting my initiative. And I aim to see, can I do it for all the scholarships? Can I make my project touch on all of this? Once I've plotted that, I say to myself, good. So which of my sustainable development goals moves the best with which national development plan chapters? We've actually got a wheel for that I didn't include in this presentation. And then I can say, right, if I can think about my own country's programs and objectives now, which of those initiatives will benefit first and foremost, primary, secondary, and so forth in this innovative process or in this engagement that I want to do? And once I've done that, colleagues, last but not least, I just dot this down, and there we go. There I have my initial idea. And this process you can do as a quick brainstorm, sort of get that conceptual idea, then engage. Now you know who you should contact, on campus, off campus, in private sector, with government, without government, who internationally, who not nationally. And so you know which partners to bring around the table and then say, let's brainstorm together. Let's hear if this will be significant. Is it something that the community we are approaching will really benefit? So that's it from me. Thank you, Program Director. I hope I made good time and that everybody is not now more confused after having seen a topology in 3 minutes flat. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hart. We won't talk about the time, but thank you. I just want to take a moment to thank all our speakers and panelists for today. It's really been some thought-provoking inputs that have come from your side. We are way over the question and answer session, but I wanted to afford you an opportunity. If there's anybody who has any questions, Dr. Hart, do we still, I see you as a virtual a video. Would we be able to take a few questions if there is? I've not seen anybody's hand up, nor have I seen any questions in the chat.
Yes, the virtual videos are the links that we share via the website blog, where people can download. And then I've shared right at the beginning of the session, I'll put it in the chat now again at the bottom, later on chats, because some of our participants joined us later as they come in and out from class and other meetings. Professor Levac launched the second Scholarship of Engagement edition. Prof. Daniels mentioned that it would be launched this week. And so I will share that link also now where people can look at it. And so it's a very nice electronic book that you can page through. And then via the website, Paul has also, that will present tomorrow, Miss Paul September Brown. She has also shared some links on how you can access the Scholarship of Engagement database, so that you can see all the different projects that's been captured. And of course, what the deans even presented yesterday. So we will for time not show the video, but share links for people to go and watch at their own time.
Okay, thanks for that update and information. Colleagues, I also just want to remind you and participants that there's also the blog, so you can upload questions on the blog if you so wish, and we'll come back to you with the answers. I don't know if I'm missing anybody, but I still don't see any questions. So, okay, so there's a new, okay, that's Cornell Hart, busy uploading the stuff in the chat. Cornell, then if there's no questions, shall I turn over to Anita for the closure?
I think so, colleagues. I think everybody is either out of electricity power or power.
Yeah, no. Yes, we've all been battling with that. We're now on to stage 4. So,
Gail, could I maybe ask a question, please?
Yes, certainly, Prof.
You've pressurized me into asking a question. I was going to ask this question afterwards, but maybe to Cornell. So that is part of the problem, I almost want to call it, that we face in research office. When we speak to researchers, they are saying, but my research is not about community engagement. Not understanding that community engagement is part of the process of research. How do we change that mindset? And I know you're going to tell me by engagement, but what type of interventions and programs do you have to change that type of mindset?
Yes, Prof. Fielding, you know, I should have said no more questions to Cornell, but thank you for that. I think it's very relevant. We know, you and I specifically know how it comes about from academic scholars. I've even put during your presentation how so many people feel, but shouldn't deviate from publishing in certain ways, and you've very adequately showed different ways of publishing. But how do we change that mindset? I think, and it's something that will be discussed tomorrow, also when we launch the UWC ORIC office. And what the unit, the community engagement unit, together with Prof. Levac, has planned the last couple of months to say, how do we use the web portal of the unit to post certain tools, checklists, techniques? So this topology, for example, will be not just the topology on a slide, but there will be tick lists, there will be little help files, etc. And so that people can virtually go in and ask on the platform and search and watch a video clip, because some of us, like myself, I learn at my best if I watch video over and over again than just attending a workshop or a webinar. But we are hoping that from after this colloquium, that we have in the last 3 colloquiums, we've started from what is the principles for engagement, etc. And we are now at this process globally where people say, how do we action our engagement? How do we action our scholarship of engagement? Because of this global phenomena that higher education institutions must now prove relevance and significance. So they must prove impact, or what we call societal impact in South Africa and Africa, or broader impacts in the States. So I think the idea is there are some faculties that approached us already and said, please, I want you to come and do a presentation, take us through this process, and then share with us tools, self-help files, templates, and sheets, so that we can start becoming more familiar with there isn't just civil society community. Or like we started in 2012 when higher education said, no, my academic scholars, my scholars is a community. Why must I go out to civil society? So it's about bringing that process in, and so that people can see, if I look at it the way I've presented it in the topology, and I cut across the different scholarships, and I keep my portfolio of evidence, then promotions will also not be a problem, because at UWC, as you know, Prof. Levak indicated that to apply for promotion, you must prove what is your scholarship of engagement. So I'm hoping that it answers your question, Prof. Fielding, and that you will be one of the Dean-elect for Science, that we will also work closely together with yourself and your faculty. We've got appointments set up for education, etc. already. So let's hope that after this colloquium, people feel, this is not such a weird concept. And it's something that I've done all along. I just didn't know how to phrase it, classify it, or categorize it. Thank you.
And if I may, Gail, and Kunal, you raise a very, thank you. You raise a very valuable point. In certain faculties, it is the definition that is not understood. So that point that you closed with about, defining exactly what that means, I think that will make the discussion so much easier as well. Because in education, compared to science, and I'm speaking as a scientist, when I think about that, the definition for me is so much different probably. So I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. And thanks, Kunal, for the answer. Is there anybody else? I see no hands up. I see no questions. Anita, I'm going to turn over to you now for the closure. Thank you very much. And thanks very much for the insights that were shared in today's session.
Thank you, Gail. And thanks, everybody. I think this was a very engaging session. And if we take Prof. Fielding and Dr. Hart's comments now at the end, that little discussion, it shows us what we were speaking about yesterday, about the shift. Because I think there was such a discussion about maybe 10 or something years ago when the focus was pure applied research and not the scholarship of teaching and learning. And so people only wanted to do discipline in their fields and not focus research on classroom-based and action research and teaching and learning. And so it's going to take time. And it is about that mind shift that we are speaking about in terms of transforming the institutional culture so that everybody understands the scholarship of engagement in the same way. And I think it was so important to have the NRF here and showing that they are absolutely engaged in this process as well, and that they are remaining relevant to the scholarship of engagement and ensuring that, that call that Dr. Ellis spoke about now at the end, there is a special call for the scholarship of engagement. And I think Prof. Fielding's, that last block, that now is the last block that actually should be the first block. I think that was absolutely amazing. And Dr. Hart, your topology, I must say it's a little bit scrambled in my head at this point, but it's a very important one. So I think all of us appreciate all the speakers today. I don't know if Dr. Jones, Professor Jones is still here, but he started the conversation, and Mr. Pokpas's insights into the anchor institution is something that we'll have to engage with in order for us to remain relevant and to be true to the mission of UWC. And so with that, I wish you all a good evening. Have a good evening. If it's dark, we're in it together. And have a good evening. Stay safe and go well. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.